Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 2 p.m. session of CME Palooza Fall. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Derek Warnick, one of the co-producers of CME Palooza. This is our So You Think You Can Support Grants session, sponsored by Platform Q Health Education. Big thank you to them. Our moderator today is Griselda Butler, Associate Director of Grants and Contributions at Otsuka Pharmaceutical Companies. We are missing one panelist who is going to be joining us a little bit late, so we'll be adding him in. And I will be turning things over to Griselda to introduce the rest of the panel in just a minute. But of course, before we get started, as always, the reading of the sponsors. Our gold sponsors, Med Learning Group, PER, and Projects and Knowledge. Our silver sponsors, Peer Audience, ACHL, Hippocrates CME, Academic CME, Integrity Continuing Education, Platform Q Health Education. And our bronze sponsors, MedIQ, Medscape Education, CMEology, PVI, Vindico, Medical Education. They're all medical education. RMEI Medical Education, Global Education Group, Real CME, Answers in CME, Helio CME, Second Page, Creative Educational Concepts, Infograph Ed, Prova Education, DKB Med, Evolve Medical Education. Give me 1 second. We have our final panelist joining us. Hi, Yvonne. Give me 1 second. I'm going through the intro slides, and then we'll be all set to go.
Thank you.
No problem. Where was I? Evolve Medical Education, Right Medicine, Spire Learning, Red Med Ed, CME Outfitters, and Excalibur Medical Education. 2 different ways that you can ask questions. You can use the Medscape text line, 267-6660-CME, and you can also tweet your question in using the CME Palooza hashtag. I will be monitoring both of those, so feel free. We've had a nice, good amount of questions coming in, so keep it up. That really helps with the sessions. And we will be we have a couple of Poll Everywhere questions sponsored by Peer Audience, so you may want to get that ready to go. You can either use the Poll Everywhere app with CME Palooza 005, or you can always plug in the URL right into your browser, www.pollev.com/CME Palooza 005. We'll have a few questions at the beginning, so you can get that ready. And my last slide before I turn things over to Griselda. Speaker disclosure: all opinions, discussions, and/or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or a position of their employer, its parent company, or affiliates. So with that, Griselda, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Derek. And thank you, Scott, for allowing us to have this session. This session was invited, so we're really excited to be here with you today. I've got some excellent colleagues from industry who are going to be sharing their expertise in just a moment. But if you read the title and then you read the description for this session, hopefully you know that this is not a session about how to get grants funded. It's not really about, how to design better grants. It's really about the people that you see in front of you. I'm going to have the opportunity to kind of interrogate my colleagues a little bit about their experiences in industry, maybe what they were expected versus what they're currently experiencing, and get a better understanding of how their specific background and experiences inform what they do. So before we jump into that, though, we have some polling questions for you. So first polling question is going to pop up, and it is: please indicate the area of health professions education that you belong to. So tell us, which area of health professions education are you employed in? I'm not going to read the responses, but this will give us a good idea of who is listening. All right. Looks like we're holding steady. So even split, medical specialty society and industry. So No scrutiny from our colleagues. And then hospital and health system and medical education companies are also tied. So that's great. So we have a good sense of who's on the line. I think we can go ahead and move to question 2. So if you're not from industry, what do you perceive to be the greatest challenge with industry-supported medical education? And you'll see your responses there. Uh-oh. I was going to say, there's only one problem? That's great. We can try and solve it right now. Okay. It's a good mix there. Just another second or so. All right. So the loss leader is difficulty receiving funding unless you're a preferred institution or provider. Interesting. And then closely followed by decreasing funding year over year in industry-supported medical education, and some of the above. So some combination of any of those responses, and then also inability to have frank discussions on industry needs and how institutions, providers can meet those needs. So that's something that we hear bubble up to the top a lot. I'm interested in the 38%. We may or may not get to anything related to that, but it's good for us to have this information. All right, I think we can move to the third question, please. If you are from industry, pharma, device, biotech, or diagnostics, or other, if we didn't capture your particular area, what do you perceive to be the greatest challenge with industry-supported medical education? And you see your choices there. So this question is if you are from industry. All right, we're going to have another few seconds. Okay. So at least half of the respondents think risk of perception of bias with single supported education is a major challenge. And then decreasing funding year over year, again, and then some of the above. So some combination of any of those responses above. But yeah, risk of perception of bias with single supported education. That certainly does come up, particularly if you are, first in class or working in a really rare space. That can be an issue, and certainly decreasing funding is always a challenge. So yeah, okay. Well, that's good to know. Thank you for responding to those questions. All right, so we have a great opportunity to get some insights from some industry leaders here. All of the panelists have different and varying backgrounds. So I'm going to ask all of them first the very same question, which is to please briefly share about their background and current role, including how many years in industry, how many years with your current employer, and how long have you worked in healthcare education? Not specifically independent medical education grants, but healthcare education. And I'm going to start with Ivan.
So thank you, Grisela, first for the invitation to participate in this panel and obviously in this meeting. I have a particular journey into education. I have been in industry, the pharma industry, for 21 years. I have a science background, but my initial 10 years were actually in the commercial positions and performance improvement roles as a certified black belt. The last 12 years, I have been in medical affairs, and specifically in external educational space, either being part of an affiliate, a region, or a global therapeutic area, developing educational strategic plans, implementing medical affairs-led programs, or in the global excellence team managing execution of programs or developing competencies. I am currently Director of External Education Excellence at AVI, where I have been for the last 4 years. I support in my role AVI affiliates and global teams on how to plan, design, execute, and measure external educational activities. Before that, I was at Eli Lilly for 17 years in diverse roles that included, in the last 7 ones, managing the medical affairs-led global programs for diabetes business unit.
Excellent. That's a really rich background, and we're going to have a chance to come back to that to help us better understand how what you do feeds into a lot of what the rest of us do in terms of independent medical education grants. So thank you for that. Next, I'll go to Anne. Tell us a little bit about your background, Anne.
Sure. Thank you, Griselda, and thank you to CME Palooza for inviting me on the panel. Hello to colleagues out there. So I have a science background also. I have a PhD in neuroscience. I've been in IME for the past 15 years on the MEC side. The first 5 of those years in CME were spent as writer, editor, scientific director, where I focused mainly on content development and some needs assessment writing. Then I shifted over to medical strategy, where I spent nearly 10 years, which is a blend of like business development, needs assessment, development, and outcomes and pub planning, along with a little bit of content development. In the last 6 months, I've been at Takeda as a MedEd grants manager for neuroscience and for hematology and for rare disease. So I am the newbie on this panel with regards to joining on the commercial supporter side.
Well, we're very pleased to have you. And 6 months in, huh? So we can still call you new, right? You get a full year and then that immediately goes away, just so you know. All right. So next up, I think we'll go to Chirag.
Thanks, Griselda, and thanks, CME Palooza, for having me. So my career is, I wouldn't say as interesting as everyone else that's spoken before me, but I'd say I started off as a pharmacist working primarily in the retail, hospital, and managed care settings. And over the last decade, I've worked across different positions within medical affairs, primarily within publication planning, med comms kind of space. And over the last several years, I've been taking on a little bit more of a leadership position in building out our office of grants. Currently, I'm the head of strategic publication planning and medical education at Neurocrine Biosciences here in not so sunny San Diego. But you know, it's been a quite interesting journey. I've also done a couple of brief stints outside of medical affairs, working in regulatory and also program management. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Chirag. And yeah, we're going to get to all of the hats you're currently wearing in your role at Neurocrine. So let's round it off with Jessica. Jessica, I'm just going to preface this by saying if some of you are thinking Jessica looks familiar when she tells you a little bit about her background, that may help you figure out where from.
Thanks, Griselda. Thank you. And thanks to CME Palooza for the opportunity to be on this panel. So I'm currently a global grant officer within Pfizer's global medical grants team. I'm aligned with our internal medicine and hospital business units. So in this role, I work closely with our medical affairs colleagues as well as GPD and research unit colleagues to help facilitate the development of a global strategy to execute efforts to support our independent initiatives in medical education, but also in quality improvement and independent research initiatives as well. The next month will be 6 years that I've been with Pfizer. I initially joined the grants team as a grant manager, and I was supporting operations for our learning and change grants and competitive grant programs. But our grants program has evolved and our remit has grown over the last several years. So I've had the opportunity to grow as well and take on new roles supporting our grants program. So I've been an independent research manager working with our medical and scientific committees, managing operations and strategy for research grants, in addition to the learning and change grants that we support. I've had an opportunity to be aligned with our emerging markets business unit to work on our what we call global strategies. So that's been a real meaningful experience. But in the last year, I've been in this global role assigned with 2 of our business units. And then prior to joining Pfizer, I worked for the Alliance for Continuing Education in the Health Professions, the Alliance, for 8 years. And I wore many, many, many hats during my tenure there, working on program development and marketing, communications, membership, operations. So you may recognize my face or name from the Alliance. And prior to that, after I graduated from college from Cornell University, I worked for a pharmaceutical market research firm, and I was doing quantitative and qualitative data research.
Wow, Jessica, that you've worn a lot of hats. I'm going to say kudos to you for having seen health education professionals in the wild and deciding to join them. Okay, because you could have gone in a completely opposite direction, knowing what you know, having worked with the Alliance. All right, so now we have a good idea of your background, and the reason why we wanted that was we want to level set with the audience so they understand a little bit about you, a little bit about your background and roles, and how different our backgrounds and roles are, and how we apply that to what we do day to day. So I'm going to move into the next kind of series of questions, and they're going to be more about your perspective based on what you do, and give us a little bit of framework of how you operate within your organization. So I'm going to start with Anne. So Anne, you have a significant background as a PhD scientist, and you were doing medical strategy before you moved over to the supportive side over the last 6 months. Tell us a little bit about how medical strategy differs on this side from what you were doing as a provider.
That's a loaded question, and you know that to be true. So in my role as a MedEd grants manager, I work right now with 6 different medical teams across 10 therapeutic areas, with potentially 1 or 2 additional medical teams to come. And really, they're all lovely people. And what I found is that they vary in their level of understanding of educational strategy. Some colleagues are not as savvy, perhaps, with regards to digital education, and prefer traditional live in-person activities, while others appreciate grants that push the envelope of innovation and in telling a compelling and engaging story that sticks with healthcare providers and patients. So my goal is, apart from continuing my training and appreciating the nuances of the role, is to try to continue to elevate their knowledge and kind of help them with their professional development with regards to MedEd, to keep MedEd visible across the teams that I work with, and to continue to emphasize the value that MedEd brings to the company. Yeah.
So I'll just stop you for 1 second on something you said about, educating internally. I think all of us, or at least many of us, can, feel that pain a little bit about the need to new people come on board. You're constantly re-educating them, not really about your role, but about the value of what you're doing in relation to the rest of the business, right? And that can be challenging because oftentimes we speak education speak, and they may speak commercial speak or scientific speak or whatever their specific discipline is. So just listening to you talk a little bit about, how different the teams are, and what the expectations are, means you're constantly having to pivot a little bit to adjust how you frame what you're doing and its value for each group. So I can appreciate that, and also feel your pain a little bit because I have a lot of teams to manage in multiple. So that's great. So Yvonne, I'm going to move over to you because you have a really different perspective to offer here. And I'm not going to try and tell it. I'm going to ask you to tell it. You said what you do, and you said external education, right? And educational excellence. So talk to us about what that means in your organization and how that relates to your exact role.
Right. So I think what you need to understand is that, at least when we're talking to external education, there is all elements of things that for us looks a given, like needs assessment, instructional design, the proper outcome measures, that are not taught anywhere. and then a standard medical affairs professional that is confronted with creating an educational plan or implementing a symposia is probably not aware of the majority of the tools that exist out there to perform impactful and relevant education. So I have the pleasure to be in an organization that understands that gap, and then basically to put resources, in this case me and a small team of people, that will actually make the role to support some of those functions and teams at the time of designing the plans or at the time or creating the programs, to guide them through and potentially educate them a bit in terms of how to do that. And then in more high level, we also have a role in terms of how to elevate some of those competencies. So how do we ensure that we have a consistent way of measuring the impact of programs across the company, programs that we do, or how do we make sure that we are at the upfront of the most innovative programs or formats that are out there. The average medical affairs professional has a lot of things on the plate, and normally they don't have the time to dedicate a lot to that. So I think this kind of resources like mine is actually a great opportunity for them to gain time, get access to a quick expertise, and obviously improve the quality of all the programs that they do of external education.
So before we finish up with you, Yvonne, can I ask you to define external education, just in case folks aren't aware of what that means exactly?
Yeah, in this case, I'm specifically referring to medical affairs-led education, which is the space in which I work. But we need to recognize that inside the programs that are provided by pharma, you have the independent medical education ones, you have the medical affairs-led, you have the commercial external education programs, and then there's a fourth bucket, which is really everything that we call collaborations with societies, which is really the kind of partnerships that we will do with a strategic goal to enhance or support a particular need. If you guys are interested in knowing more, actually the Medical Affairs Professional Society has actually released a standard guidance that actually describes some of these. So this is a good resource for anybody who wants to know more about the specific types.
Thank you for that, Yvonne. And yeah, I'll make a plug too for the MAPS standards and guidance. Yvonne and Patty, Pratita, Jackie, there are a lot of industry folks who work on that. And I think it's important to have resources outside of our traditional resources. And because we work in a unique environment within industry, we need maybe other things, right, that we can't always get through the Alliance or through, some of our education specific organizations. So thank you for that, Yvonne. I'm going to jump to Chirag to talk a little bit about what you do, particularly talk to us a little bit about all of those pillars you lined up earlier, because that's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So, I spent all of my career on the commercial supporter side. And like I said earlier, primarily within the publication scientific communication space. But currently my role involves overseeing and building strategies and executing publication plans across the portfolio for Neurocrine, along with their Office of Grants. Now, it's kind of interesting to hear how different companies have the grants office or group set up. At Neurocrine, that Office of Grants includes independent medical education, corporate sponsorships, charitable contributions. And the third group that I'm currently building out and overseeing is the Investigator-Initiated Trial, or IIT research program. So quite a bit across the portfolio, given that our company is a growing mid-sized company, primarily invested in the neurology and psychiatric space, which encompasses quite a bit of different areas. But it's definitely it's a balancing act, right? To be able to take the insights from each of these groups and be able to really synergize them. And what I mean by that is, in the publications realm, we obviously have to conduct needs assessments, gap analyses, understand what the literature, what the scientific community needs are, and then be able to address them, hopefully using our clinical trials, disseminating the data from them, the non-clinical trials, disseminating data from them. So, my group has always, it's been a hybrid role with hybrid responsibilities, which is to always keep the end goal in mind, which is education. So whether we educate via a publication or via our Office of Grants, there's always opportunities for us to leverage insights from either or. So we don't actually treat them as independent groups necessarily. Maybe in the future that may change, but at this time, we definitely value independent medical education because we understand that quite a bit of work is done in terms of conducting needs assessments. And it's nice to see, whether or not we're generating similar insights on the publication side. The audiences are the same for us to educate, so that doesn't differ. In terms of the educational strategies and priorities, I would argue that they aren't that different either. So, I'm happy to take on additional questions. And, if there were areas, it looks like questions coming in. If I were to choose, would I prefer to keep the different areas or specialize? I would argue that, we're bringing on folks that are specialized in each of these areas. I think that adds great value. Right now, we are building out teams for each of these groups, which is nice, but bringing in specialists, especially for in terms of the medical education piece, really can add value. And as we're growing, like I said, as a company as well, help us, really truly become that global medical education department. So in short, yes, it would be, specialists are welcome, and also jack of all trades are also welcome. There's always, as you heard from Yvonne, there's always an opportunity for within medical affairs, especially for folks with science background, non-science backgrounds, to really just roll up the sleeves and kind of jump on board and educate. I mean, like I said, the one thing to take away is, education, how we educate differs, but the goal of education shouldn't, right? We all have that goal to make sure we get out our strategic messaging and help patients ultimately. So.
Thank you, Chirag. Something you said really resonated with me. You're a smaller, more nimble organization right now, and you're looking to build out teams. But when you're a smaller organization, you have to wear every hat someone hands you, right? And so you get a better picture of not only how your organization runs, but where you fit in. And then you can make those important connections that sometimes when you work for a large organization, you struggle to make. And I think that's why sometimes, and I'll just speak for myself, why early on my organization was small and now we're kind of medium. I struggle to know who the right people were to connect with in order to tell my story, right? I had this story to tell and I thought it was so great. Yep. Until they were like, what? Why are you talking to us about this? And I'm like, what I do is so important. And then I was like, oh, it's not that they don't care. It's that I'm not framing it the right way. And having your hands in a few different areas and oversight right now, I think positions you really well.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's really a blessing in disguise because being able to see where various data points are going to be coming out from, whether it's, obviously I didn't talk too much about the investigator-initiated trial piece, various research being disseminated across scientific conferences that, we didn't generate, but we supported. It's important to have the broad bird's eye view across when is data being released, whether it's released by us, researchers, obviously educational programs that could be strategically rolled out to really optimize or even amplify our educational messages is a strong platform. So I think the way that we've kind of organized ourselves currently has allowed us to deliver and make a great impact. So who knows? Hopefully, as we grow, we may have to reorganize, but right now it is working. So it's definitely
that's good to hear. All right, so Jessica, you mentioned at the very end of your intro about having worked for the Alliance. I'm curious, what, at least at the time, you were very involved in understanding what the needs of health education professionals were that would help them do their jobs better. Have there been any benefits that you brought with you to having had that experience, or was it like just starting from scratch because pharma is a completely different animal and Pfizer is its own entity unto itself?
No, I don't think starting from scratch. I definitely think there were things I was able to bring with me to Pfizer. So my role at the Alliance definitely helped me with my move into industry. When the Alliance was moving to being managed by an association management company in my transition period, came to an end with the Alliance, I applied for this grant manager position at Pfizer because I did think that my skills were transferable. And fortunately, Pfizer agreed, so I joined their team. And then, as I mentioned, our grants team has evolved greatly throughout the last several years that I've been there. So having that kind of perspective from the Alliance of educating the educators and being involved and wearing so many hats there, I think having all of that change management skills from the Alliance was definitely transferable to Pfizer and to a company this large that even though a lot has changed, we're able to respond quickly and grow as needed. So at the Alliance, I was involved in the annual meeting program development. We had the Alliance Industry Summit, or PACME, back in the days, if you if you remember, Griselda, and also involved in membership and operations. But we were also involved in developing initiatives like the CALLS program, the Competency Assessment and Lifelong Learning Series, which I think over time the name has changed. But being involved in the development of those initiatives and seeing the day-to-day work and challenges that CPD professionals and health systems as well are facing, these are the exact things we're looking for in the grants that I'm reviewing and the things that we're supporting to truly make an impact. So I'm able to see the perspective from both the grant seeker as well as the commercial supporter, since our membership at the Alliance involves, all of the above. So, and in addition, working at the Alliance, I've built, connections and relationships with the members that we had that helped me with my career journey and to where I am today.
I like to hear that. I think that's so important. I feel like the provider community, even though there's some competition there, it's a pretty tight-knit community. They know each other, they know each other's work, etc. And I'll be honest, I struggled to find someone who was willing to talk to me at all about what it would be like if I moved to the other side, coming from being a provider for so long. And when I made the leap, luckily I landed at an organization that had a need that was so specific that I could fill. And over time, I was able to build those relationships, but I really didn't know who to ask. And of the people I did know, they were like, is that really what you want to do? And I was like, uh-oh, why am I choosing this? So it's nice to see that our networks work, but it's also important to hear from you that some of what you observed working for the Alliance helped kind of prepare you in a way to understand what you might be seeing on the other end as you began the process of looking at grants and understand your organization's educational goals and missions, right? So exactly. Thank you for sharing that. I think then I kind of want to move back to Yvonne. I want to talk to you a little bit about medical affairs-led education. I think this is an area that a lot of folks who may be listening who aren't in industry would find kind of interesting, right? So we've been talking a little bit in industry about how medical education grants is a bit in competition with our other medical affairs colleagues in terms of prioritizing what education is more valuable and who has more interesting metrics and that kind of thing. And I think you probably have a more balanced perspective of how and why they both matter, right? And how they may matter across the organization. So I'd love to hear from you about that.
Sure. So I think all of those are different channels for the same end. At the end of the day, what is important is what is the need that we want to accomplish. And there is a good case for all of them, whether it's IME, medical affairs-led, collaborations, and sometimes even commercial-led education. Now, the position of each one of them really depends on what is the specific education and need and the audience we want to address. What is the regulatory environment that we need to address? And what is the regulatory interpretation, risk tolerance of every company? So if I take IME has a wide reach, it's very structured, has an external perception of unbiased versus probably the others. However, his position is dependent on, again, the geography and also the therapeutical area life cycle moment that the supporting company is going through. So historically, we have seen companies securing funds for ME during pre-launch periods, where we have seen the same companies shifting those fundings to medical-led programs when they're getting into a more targeted scientific education during launch or close to launch, to make sure that some of the specific scientific narratives, some of the specific data is actually hitting the mark. So again, going back to my answer, I don't think there is a prefer or the other. It really depends on the environment, on the position, the area, and obviously the need that we want to address.
Yeah, I agree with you. It would be hard to prioritize, but I am curious about the importance of understanding which one is the best solution to address the goal or objective of the organization. So I get that question a lot because, my medical affairs, my field medical team, they do quite a lot of disease state education, which is company led, it's unbranded, et cetera. And I'm often told, well, they're going to cover that. And I have to kind of walk it back and say, yes, absolutely. They're going to touch on these subjects. But here's what education that is independent can do in support of this particular goal or objective. Here's what commercial is going to be able to say, right? Versus what, we may say in a collaboration with another institution. So I'm curious about how those decisions are made. Are you part of that decision-making process? And if so, talk a little bit about what goes into it.
Sure. So obviously the planning process is a bit different depending on the company. I think where I can share is that definitely, at least in our situation, whatever you are in commercial, in medical affairs, in access, or whatever, the planning process, or even independent medical education, the planning process has a common starting part, which is really about the needs of the patients. And then what are the gaps to achieve a clinical meaningful response and a clinical practice that actually support those needs. And then basically based on that, you have some gaps. Now, those gaps can actually be fulfilled through different tools. And those tools may be carried by different organizations inside at least our company. And then I think the initial part of the journey, at least when I'm sitting, is the same, and I will argue should be the same for everybody. We should all agree what are the priorities, what are the needs, and what are the gaps. I think how do we address them? This is where actually from the even regulatory perspective, we need to start chunking some of the approaches on how do we touch those elements. So how do we actually happens? Again, that's something that that it depends on in every company, but usually there is a forum where there's a high level discussion about this is the high level elements that will lead more sense, that makes more sense to be covered by medical. This is the high level elements that makes more sense to be addressed by commercial. Well, those are the elements that make more sense to be potentially covered through other sources of independent education. Without getting into the detail, without having a tactical discussion, there is a high level discussion and understanding that happens, at least in our case, at the brand plan level. Then the tactical discussion comes afterwards, and that's tactical discussion that happens for every separate function.
Thank you for explaining that. And you may be wondering, why am I asking for that? Because one of the important things about talking with all of you today is trying to give folks a sense of what it's really like sort of in the inner workings of industry. I think Chirag used a good word earlier, synergies. How are we synergistic, right? How can we become synergistic? And I think some of the things I've heard from industry have been, it can be difficult to find your share of voice when you're talking just grants. And I think one of the things I want to encourage folks to do is something that has happened within your organization, Yvonne, and something that you're leading is to think about education more broadly, right? How are you accomplishing education across the organization? And connect with those colleagues, even the ones in commercial, appropriately to understand at least what they're doing. Connect with your medical affairs colleagues where you can to understand what they're doing and how you can help them, because oftentimes the quality of the education is, quite different. Not that it's bad, but they have limitations on what they can do, right? They've got paid speakers, they have a platform, and there's a very specific time and place. Whereas with independent education, there's often a lot more variety. There's often a lot more creativity, right? And we can also sometimes have a say when we do things like RFPs or letters of intent. So I think that, the goal of asking you about that is really to help folks think creatively, some who may be struggling in particular with understanding how they make the right connection points for what they do elevated, and maybe address some of those things we saw earlier in the polls, like lack of funding year over year, right? And how those things change. I think when you can raise your share of voice, and when you can provide data that supports it, and you can show how it integrates with what's happening across the company, you're better positioned, right, to tell your story more effectively, and potentially that results in greater levels of support, potentially. I understand there's a question, so before we move on, there's a question for all of us, for every panelist. So do any of the panelists have experience on the provider side? If so, have you found that experience beneficial in your current role? So I know Anne does. She spoke about it earlier. I do. I was a education provider for about 15 and a half years, and then the last 9 and a half or so as a commercial supporter. It's evolved and changed quite a lot since that time. And it was more recently on the other side. So maybe she could speak to, maybe you can speak to that specifically. Anne, could you speak a little bit to how you've seen the provider role evolve, and maybe how some of that strengthened your position to move to the supporter side?
Honestly, the move to the supporter side was an opportunity. I'd known Cody for many years, and he had a need, and I was certainly, my interest was piqued, and so the fit was a good one. As far as the transference of skills, I did find that what I've learned on the MEC side was very helpful, and I was able to apply them, particularly in interfacing with the many medical teams that I work with across the different therapeutic areas. It was helpful to be able to speak and understand their language, and also to be mindful of the strategy, the strategic imperatives that was set forth from brand planning, and then across the different cross-functional teams, including MedEd. So I found that was very helpful. I think that coming from the provider side to the commercial supporter side, I certainly have a deeper appreciation amongst my colleagues who are on the provider side, the level of effort that it takes to put together a thoughtful grant, and a good grant with needs assessments that are strategic and fit well with the agenda, and also with the proposed learning objectives. So I'm trying to share that perspective with my medical teams and with my colleagues internally. And again, I've been here 6 months, and hopefully it will help.
I'm sure they benefit from everything you bring to the table, particularly, as you mentioned, having that scientific background and being able to speak to your colleagues in that respect, but also because you know and understand the underpinnings of quality education, and you're guiding them with both those principles in mind, not just the education, right? Because sometimes there's a distrust of that. It's like, oh, you care about education, you don't really care about the science. It's like, you can't really have one without the other. So I'm not sure how you arrived at that conclusion, but it's really helpful when I'm just going to say it, when your colleagues respect your scientific acumen, right? When they respect your knowledge and understanding of the science. And Chirag, that's probably very true of you too, coming in as a pharmacist in particular. So let me, I want to move to something that's really interesting, because I think we talked a little bit about, some of the needs that we have as independent organizations, and how we look at things across company, right? To arrive at a strategy that serves the purpose of improving patient health outcomes. Pfizer in particular has been a leader and an innovator in the space for a long time, Jessica, and you've been able to be there long enough now to see even how it's evolved even further. So, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about, what you think your role is and how connected you feel to that goal of improving patient lives.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think at Pfizer, it's just part of our culture, and like embodied within our purpose, which is breakthroughs that change patients' lives. And you're always hearing about our values and our behaviors. They say courage, excellence, equity, and joy. So embodied within the culture and our mission, we're encouraged to think big and boldly, always putting patients first and supporting programs that are ultimately going to lead to better health outcomes and health equity as well. So I think, it's just really ingrained within the culture of the company. And then that gets, spread out throughout all of the different groups. And in global medical grants, since we're reaching the external community, we're really a key component in helping achieve those goals. So, and I think one thing that's somewhat unique for Pfizer is that we engage external partners to identify solutions to help resolve these issues in order to see some real impact. So we know we can't do it alone. So partnering with these external organizations and leveraging our competitive grant program and partner model, it really expands our reach and the credibility and ultimately the impact at the patient level. So I think that's what I've mostly truly enjoyed at Pfizer so far. In addition to working with all of our incredible internal colleagues, it's also having the opportunity to work with these external organizations to achieve like aligned goals that we have. So I think that's pretty unique. It definitely empowers us to change the lives of patients by, working both with the external community and leveraging all the internal expertise we have as well. So, and we're also addressing, I've had the opportunity to work on projects that are not just specific to our areas of interest or therapeutic areas. It can go above and beyond that. So I like that we've had the flexibility to make investments in like health equity initiatives that might cover a broad preventative and disease states, but not specifically something we're aligned with. So that was something I wasn't expecting coming into commercial supporter role. I thought it would be very aligned to the unmet need and strategic focus of what we're looking to support in terms of particular therapeutic areas, but we're really looking to make a bigger impact and really put patients first. So it's true. It's not just words, it's true. So,
yeah. That's great to hear. And I don't think we doubted it. I think culture is something probably all of our organizations talk about. Mm-hmm. Some may have, obviously cultures can be different, but the whole idea of patient centricity and patient first, for a while, it seemed like it was going to be a buzzword
right.
that folks were using on a regular basis. And I personally seen just a huge shift across industry where patients are leading a lot of the time. They're leading the discussion about what they need and what they want. And when I say patients, I also mean, to your point about equity, individuals, right? These aren't people who need to be defined by their disease. They're you, they're me, right? We're all healthcare consumers and individuals. And so that whole focus on really understanding the needs of communities and maybe focusing more broadly in a way that you said, big ideas, take big, bold chances. I think that's great because I don't think everyone's environment is such that they feel they have the opportunity to take big, bold chances in what they do, right? They may feel they need to stay in a box, but even within your box, what can you do within there, right? How can you change things slightly? I think that sometimes we just need inspiration, right? So it's really helpful to hear you talk about that. So we've got about, 6 minutes or so left before we want to leave it open for some more questions. So I want to move to Chirag, I think. So I want to ask you something about strategy, right? This is a question that comes up all the time. For some reason, people seem to divorce medical education grant strategy from other strategy within medical affairs, as if somehow we're not doing any of the same thing, or it's not based on science or something. So because you have oversight of so many different functions within, that are under your umbrella, talk to us about strategy for you and how you approach it.
It's a pretty loaded question. And I'll be quite transparent here. I've been at small, medium, large organizations, and I've seen that collaboration work well in some places, and in some places not so well. And what it comes down to, I think we've been kind of stressing throughout, or kind of organically came up, was just having that open communication with not only just within medical affairs, but more cross-functionally across the organization, to uncover some opportunities where you can really understand what that strategy is. And it's such a one of those buzzwords that we nowadays we work in, and it's like, well, what does it really mean when we talk about strategy? And I would argue, kind of being a little biased here, is that talk to your publications professional, your SciComms group. And the reason why I say that is usually this is the group that has the remit of building a scientific platform, which really is that all-encompassing strategic communication framework, which involves not only just the key data that's being generated by the organization, but also uncovers the gaps. So where are the areas that you really are currently at the current state cannot support? So are there areas that that will resonate with certain the audiences you're looking to educate, and what are the areas that will not resonate? I mean, having this insightful information, and I would almost think that starting with that SciComms group, engaging with them, being part of those publication strategy calls, will give a little bit of an eye opener, especially on the medical education side, on, wow, I didn't really know that this did not resonate with physicians. And of course, we all work with so many different organizations, and we're constantly getting data from outside and inside, so it's kind of hard to tease it out. But I really think that the scientific platform really serves as the sort of starting point, which is an evolving framework as new data comes in, and also the market may change. So I think building that strategy probably starts there. Again, it's not the only place. Having that open communication with your field medical team, even your commercial colleagues, as I was mentioned, to understand really those strategic imperatives is key. End of the day, I think Yvonne, he made a really good point about this, is they're really, the tactics themselves, whether what channel we decide to deploy the education, whether it's a publication or whether it's a educational program that the company decides to support, it's really one tactic, right? But having an integrated approach to that, how you approach these tactics, and understanding how you can, like I said, the word amplify that education is important, because it no longer becomes one event or one enduring series, for instance. It becomes part of the bigger picture for the company, and helps accomplish a larger educational goal. And you may uncover a lot of different opportunities across the company just by chatting within medical affairs, as a step one. So I'm not going to go belabor the point too much, but the strategy really starts inside within your teams, and people will be surprised how much work goes into building all these plans all of us have to do on the commercial supporter side. So I'd just say building a strategy starts inside first, before you go outside looking for more data. So aligning first inside probably is a good place to start.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a good point for anybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a provider or supporter. I always am surprised when I work with providers who don't go back to mine their own data to understand how far they've been able to move the needle, if they have been able to do that, and to reevaluate what the priority is in terms of the gaps and needs that can be met and who the audiences are. If you have a robust data set, you should be looking at it. Data, right? It's true for us, it's true for providers, it's true for everybody, because our data basically is now how we're defined, right? So it's so important that if you have that data set, go back to the well sometimes, take a moment, step away from I'm going to create new or more, because more isn't always the answer, right? Better is always good, right? We always want to up our game. I know we all do. And part of upping your game means understanding what you've been able to accomplish, where you still have deficits, and how to close those, right? So having a good strategy sometimes for me means reevaluating whether the strategy I have already is good enough, right? Before I do anything else and say, we should do this or that, I often say, did we do this well? Or was this the right thing to do at all, right? So I know we're coming to the end of our time. We've only got 5 minutes or so left. I think we're going to skip that last question for polling. But I'm going to give you 30 seconds, each of you. Please tell me, how has the actual experience of being a commercial supporter differed from your original expectations, if you had any expectations? And I'm going to start with Anne.
It was the commercial support side was a black box, so I did not have any expectations. I try not to form any, and I've been pleasantly surprised.
Love to hear that. All right, Jessica.
I would say that you think there's so much funding, but there's really not. You have to really be strategic, and there's limited funding to go around. So I think some outsiders might think that there's just this unlimited pot of funds, but unfortunately there's not. And sometimes there's really hard decisions that have to be made, and that's the one thing I wasn't expecting, how hard it would be to go through that process.
Chirag, you're next.
Yeah, keep it very quick. I've never had to build a grants page or really the infrastructure to accept these kind of things. I was really an eye opener to me how much work goes into building these types of systems and portals and understanding the need for the organization, and then obviously keeping the user experience in mind for providers and things like that. So definitely was an eye opener how much work goes into it, and it's a constant evolution. We're always updating and getting good feedback. So a lot of work on the commercial support side just for even setting up the infrastructure to accept grants.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, because that's an important point. So I have a different question for Yvonne. Yvonne, you were not a provider. You're not currently working in medical education grants, but you have great oversight into sort of what the organization is doing and where education is a priority. Can you tell us briefly, is there something that's happening within the organization outside of medical education grants that we should be thinking about? Is there something that other folks are doing well with their disease education that we could do better?
I think there's two things that happen very quickly that we are all trying to learn. And I think obviously in the independent space, you also start looking into. The first one is obviously that everything is becoming digital these days. And that is no longer about having a multi-channel strategy. It is really about how do you orchestrate the programs. And I think it is a subtle, but it's a very important difference, because it's not the same to throw out there different channels and actually orchestrate them in a consistent way. So there's a lot of efforts that are happening in companies to build what we call customer experience flows. This is something that definitely I would encourage to learn and know a bit more. And the second element, it's the data, because now that everything is in the virtual space, we know who logged, we know how much they spend, we know what they like, we know what they don't like. There's a wealth of data we didn't have before. And we need to learn how to use this data, which currently, to be honest, I think on the medical side and certainly on the IME side, which is on the infancy, this is no longer about the impact, it's about also understanding the preferences.
Thank you. I think that was a perfect place to end. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'll throw it back to Derek.
As I muted myself, of course. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We have 1 minute left, so let me go through my slides really quickly. Please take our survey if you have an opportunity to on our live page. And our next session that's coming up that you can just click on the link on the next page, on the live page, is Tech Tools for the CME Professional. Also, I'm going to put in a plug for our trivia session, which is the last one of the day. Please stick around from that. It's a lot of fun. Thank you to our panel. Great job. Tremendous session. And I appreciate all of you being able to join us. On to the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.